Welcome to our program with Marguerite Scully of the St. Tammany Genealogical Society. I'm Amanda Follis. I'm with the City Archives. We're very grateful for her partnership in putting on this Irish genealogy program today. We're very excited to have her. Let me tell you a little bit about Marguerite. Marguerite is a professional genealogical researcher and lecturer, and she currently serves as the president of the St. Tammany Genealogical Society. She is a former member of the board of the Louisiana Genealogical and Historical Society. For over 20 years, Marguerite has been conducting genealogical research for her own family and those of her clients. As part of her research, Marguerite has visited numerous historic record repositories throughout the United States and in Ireland. And today she's here to share what a lot of resources that can be accessed online. With that being said, I would love to turn it over to Marguerite now. Thank you, Marguerite.
Oh, thank you, Amanda, and the top of the morning to all of you. um, I'm gonna just get right into it, and again, there'll be questions at the end, and I'm so pleased to be invited, and thank you, Amanda. It is March. It is. I informed my husband this morning. St. Patrick's Day isn't just a day; it's a month. So it's sort of like Mardi Gras. It just goes on and on. So start wearing that green now. All right, a couple of just notes here about the topics I'm going to be covering in this talk. We don't have enough time to get into depth in this subject, but we can do a pretty good job on the important points. First, I'm going to just review at the beginning, and I'll review at the end the steps to conducting Irish genealogical research. And then we'll talk about researching US documents for your Irish immigrant ancestor, which is going to be a very important part of your research efforts. Now, in order to understand Irish records, we have to get into understanding the civil land divisions in Ireland, how it's broken up, and also the ecclesiastical divisions in Ireland. So we're going to spend a little time talking about that. And then at the end, we'll talk about some of the key Irish documents that you may be able to find about your ancestors. And I'm focusing on the key ones and the ones that you can address online. Okay, so here we go. Just a couple of notes. Again, we only have a short time. This is a very big topic, and it's constantly evolving in terms of records that are appearing or being now accessible to the public, either in person or online. It's amazing. So you're going to be, if you're into Irish genealogy, like myself, you're learning every day new things. I would say this lecture is for beginning or maybe a little intermediate Irish researchers. Anybody who's more involved than that might find, hopefully you'll find at least something in here that's new for you. I want to just say almost everything I am going to show you on this presentation is available to you yourself online or in books from other sources. So remember that you can always research a topic later. No one could remember all of what I'm going to say today, just from this talk. I noticed in chat one person said they'd take notes. That's a great idea, I think. And I'm going to show you some maps and examples of documents with fine print. You're not meant to be able to read the documents. I just wanted to give you a sense, a rough idea of the point I'm making or what the document will look like if you find it, or likely to look like. One of the things you have to understand, I'm sure most of you do, that once you get into past a certain point in research, even in the US, but particularly in Ireland, you're going to be reading handwriting. So imagine all the states that got rid of cursive writing and what the opportunities are going to be for folks who can't read cursive to do any kind of genealogical research beyond a certain point. So, but I find that in general, the Irish actually have pretty good handwriting, or put people in positions who are recording records to have good handwriting. And again, there are some typed, as we'll see, documents. Okay. So first, the steps to conducting Irish genealogical research. And again, I'm going to summarize these again at the end in a slightly different fashion, but pretty much the same. As in any research, you want to start by interviewing family members, especially the older members who may know the family history. And what you're looking for, especially if your Irish ancestors are several generations back, is maybe some little tidbit that was passed down. I'm always shocked by the fact that there's a story or two in my family that my cousins and even second cousins know that I've never heard. So engage in a conversation and get what you can. Now, what you need to do before you hop the pond for records is find out everything you can possibly find out about your Irish immigrant ancestor. And not just your direct ancestor, but their immediate family members who also immigrated. Very important. And then when you've collected all those records, and we're going to go through some lists here so you'll be able to see what I'm talking about, you want to sit down and write a complete description of the immigrant ancestor and a complete description of each of the immediate family members, because a lot of times it's collectively that you're able to identify your family in Irish records by the records of the other family members, where you can put them together. It's very important. Okay, this is something I have to say, and I'll be saying it throughout this talk. You can't just know your ancestor came from Ireland. And usually, unless you have a very unusual name or a relatively unusual name, just knowing the county isn't enough. So when you're doing your research of the records in the US, you're looking for any record that will identify the townland or the civil parish. Okay, because that is going to be a godsend to you for helping you identify them in Irish records. Once you've identified the Irish immigrants county, of course, and then either the townland or the civil parish or both, from that, and because you're going to hear these names in this talk, from that piece of information or those pieces, you will be able to identify the barony, the poor law union, the ecclesiastical diocese, and probably even the church parishes. So from that location. So just with a few tidbits, you get the rest, so to speak. Once you've got that information, now you need to identify which Irish records are available for that location, place, and the time frame in which your ancestors were living in Ireland last, before they immigrated. Okay, just like in the United States, some records don't exist past a certain point. They didn't exist. So if they came before that, those records don't exist, or vice versa. They came after that, those records don't exist. So you need to know, again, the place they came from and when they came. And that would be all part of your research in US records. Once you've identified which Irish records are available for your place in your time period, then you look for those records online. And I'm going to give you some of the key ones here today. You can also order or request Irish records via mail or email, or even hire an Irish researcher. And of course, you could visit Ireland yourself and do some research, which would require you to plan this carefully, because you don't want to go there and not give yourself enough time. And a lot of the places that are record holding require appointments and so on. So you'd have to research all of that, a visit, very carefully. Okay. So remember, I'm repeating this. Where do you start? Don't start without a complete description of your Irish immigrant ancestor. Again, that you get from US records. Now we're going to talk about those records, those US records that may apply to your Irish immigrant ancestor. Well, I have a slide in another talk that shows the name Donahue spelled 16 different ways for the same man in records. The same man. So please, you may have your favorite way to spell it or the correct way. A lot of people say this is the correct way. Well, Irish don't think that way, at least historically haven't thought that way. Collect all the variant spellings of the name as you come across them, whether from that individual or maybe their siblings. Same thing with the given name or names. Get all the variant spellings. Dennis, for example, in Ireland is usually spelled with one N. Okay, so you know, Dennis, 2 N's, Dennis, 1 N, and you'll see both in an Irish record if the individual's name is Dennis. Find out when they arrived to the US. And if you can't get the exact year, you want an approximate year. And of course, you would be looking for that information in things like a passenger list, a naturalization record, an obituary. A lot of obituaries say you've been in the city for 32 years. You know, that may give you a framework of how close, you know, what year they came. The first mention in a city directory, or the first mention in a census. Now, the 1900 US Census does give a year of immigration and the number of years in the US. However, just be aware, they're not always correct. So I would make sure I collected multiple records, as many records as I could, to validate when they actually came. Now, you also need at least the approximate year of birth of the immigrant ancestor. And where would you get that? Again, death records, tombstones, if necessary. Okay, remember, because they're not born here if they're an immigrant, so you're not looking for a birth record or a baptism record. So a lot of times the approximate years are in death records and tombstones. But again, you can extrapolate them from passenger lists, census records. You might get a marriage record that will give their age at marriage or age at death in the death record or obituary. So all of that. You also want, of course, to understand what their occupation is. That could help you also. And again, that information is usually found in census records and city directories, occasionally on a death record. Now, especially for those who immigrated with spouses, but even the spouses that married here, you want to collect the marriage records, the wills, the probate, and the obituaries. You want the names of their parents. Now, obviously, if they came with their parents, hopefully you have that because you'll have their records. They would be part of the immigrant group that you would be researching. But if someone came whose parents stayed in Ireland, okay, the best place I've found to find the names of a parent of an individual are in church marriage records, particularly if you're lucky if they're Catholic, because they almost always recorded the names of the parents. Not always, but almost always. So, and just incidentally, you want to be sure, if you get a marriage record from a church and there isn't a place on there to record the parents' names on their form, that doesn't mean that the names weren't recorded, but because the form didn't have a place for the names, they might not be written on there. So you might want to go back if you have a form that doesn't have a place for parents' names, and contact them again and ask them to go back into the original record and either give you a photocopy of that record or provide the names of the parents for you. When I write for for US marriage records, I always write a letter and I always specify I want the parents' names, because I know how this works, that some places don't have places on their forms for that information. Now, the names of their siblings, especially if their siblings were born in Ireland as they were, and they came here, then you want to collect their obituaries, their wills, their probate records, their census records, and so on and so on. And a lot of times we find the names of siblings by looking, they are often the witnesses for the marriage that occurred in the US, or the sponsors for the baptism records of the children. So that's why we collect all the baptism records, even for the non-ancestors, the siblings of our ancestor, if they were born here in the US. Also, for all the documents that you record, again, particularly, wills, marriage records, and so on, signatures on marriage bonds, you want to collect the names of all the friends and business partners that you can find, because very often they came from the same place in Ireland and they might even be related. So sometimes we can't find information going back on our ancestor, but by looking at this close friend or a close relative's information records, we can get back farther. So again, a description of each person that immigrated or is close associate with the immigrant ancestor. Now, again, I said I was going to mention this again. I'm going to say it again. Unless the Irish immigrant has a very unusual, and maybe Barry isn't necessary to say, unusual last name, it is very important that you identify the county, and the county's mentioned twice here, for emphasis, and the civil parish or townland of origin in Ireland. County alone, with a name like Donahue or, O'Reilly or whatever, is usually not enough. I'm not saying it's impossible, but your research is going to be so much harder if you don't buckle into that detail that you can probably find. Okay, so where are the best US records to find the name of a townland and the civil parish, as well as the county? Obituaries. Marriage records, both church and civil, sometimes don't just say Ireland, they say County Galway, Ireland, or they even mention a town or townland. The birth and baptism records of the children of the immigrant that were born here in the US, sometimes their records, which when they name the parents, say what part of Ireland they're from. I have found that myself, at least a couple of times. If you happen to be one of those people whose ancestor was significant enough, let's say that wealthy enough to have a biography written, I always look in those county books all over the United States, those county books that show up here and there, to see the biographies, because if you have an Irish immigrant in them, they almost always mention exactly where they came from in Ireland. The passenger lists, obviously, although not as helpful. Most of the time, passenger lists strictly say Ireland, but occasionally you will find at least a county. This is an example, by the way, this is an example of one of the spellings you wouldn't have expected for Donahue. Okay, Donoughue. That wouldn't have been my guess. Maurice. And looky here, here's his obituary. This is in the Times-Picayune. And it says he's a native of the parish of Buttevant, County of Cork, Ireland. And it gives his age, so you can approximate his birthday. Okay, now it doesn't give information about how many years he was in the US and so on. But with this information, this is incredibly lucky, fine, because now I have the parish of Buttevant right here. And Buttevant is a civil parish, it's also an ecclesiastical parish. And even though those boundaries don't overlap exactly, it turned out that's where I went to get the records for this gentleman. Also, if you can find naturalization documents, a lot of times I'm looking particularly for what's called the Declaration of Intention. Those records can be incredible. They often could say something like what ship they came in, what port, what date, but also at least what county. Sometimes more specific than that. Military records, if they joined the service or participated in war, death records, and tombstones. And again, just another example. This is Nora Moylan. Here it is, her tombstone. Nora, wife of Thomas Moylan, born, it gives her exact date of birth, and it says that she's from Knockalard, County Galway, Ireland. And then it gives her exact date of death. So definitely, and this is a US record. This is a US tombstone. Now, again, if you don't find the townland or civil parish in these records for your direct ancestor, what are you doing? You're trying to find all these same records for their siblings, their parents, their children, anybody, their cousins, because your ancestors' record group may not have included that information, but their brothers might have, their first cousins might have. So you collect all the same records that I mentioned for parents, siblings, and so on, and if necessary, business partners and friends. Again, a lot of times they came from the same areas. Now, once you have identified, again, a place and time, okay, now we're gonna move into Irish records. And once we move into Irish records, it's important that you understand how the records are divvied up, and they're divvied up by location mainly, and then time. So location meaning civil land distinctions, and also ecclesiastical divisions, what parish and diocese and so on they're in. So you have to understand these divisions in order to find the records you need. So let's look first at the civil land divisions in Ireland. Well, first off, and I hope most people know this, but just in case, Ireland, and again, historically was a island, all of which was Ireland. Now, since the beginning of the 20th century, Ireland is divided into two distinct countries. Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK and the British Isles, so to speak, and Ireland, which is the now known as the Republic of Ireland. And if you have Irish ancestors, you might note on some of the census records that they will actually, instead of just saying Ireland, their census records in the US, the immigrant might say Republic of Ireland, or even statements like Free Ireland. Okay, so of course, where the records are and what records are available are slightly different, whether you're talking about Northern Ireland versus the Republic of Ireland. This might not be the best choice for this, but I'll underline here, show you that Ireland historically, way back in the past, was divided into 4 provinces and then counties. And so this map is just one of the places where I found the 4 provinces of Ulster, Connacht, Leinster, and Munster. Most records are not divvied up like that, but again, it's helpful to just understand that. And then for each one of those provinces, there's a number of different counties in there. Now, again, let's understand, if we were going to look for the records of an individual in the United States, not even Irish, okay, just anybody, you would say to yourself, well, I have to know what state they lived in. I have to know what county, or in the case of Louisiana, parish they lived in as best I could, because just knowing somebody came from Louisiana or Massachusetts is usually not enough, and we understand that. And then we would try, once we've identified the parish or the county, we would also try to find the town or the city or the nearest location to where they lived. So we understand that we would try to narrow down to that place. Remember, in Irish records, we're trying to narrow down from Ireland to county to civil parish or townland or both. So these are the civil land divisions in Ireland, and I've underlined the 3 I'm mainly focused on. And I'm not saying you need to get the civil parish and the townland, but knowing just one of these, the county and just one of these, is very important. Now, there are records that are divided up by poor law unions, baronies, and so on, but you can identify these other land divisions once you know the county and either the civil parish or the townland. So you only really need these 3, or these, or this one and one of these to get the others. It's not that hard. Also, and this is something that stumped me for a long time, we have local geographic names, and I should know better, because I know that at least some, from my family in Ireland, there were, every field had a name. So we have sort of like just locations that aren't actually just that everybody knows that location by that name. And sometimes that can be a little confusing. So it's just good to know that. If you can't find the townland and that they list on the tombstone in County Galway, it's possible that it's an area that everybody knows by that, and you might have to do even more digging. I called it townlands. Now, just to give you an idea how the complexity of this, remember I mentioned there's 4 provinces. There's 32 counties in Ireland, and I'm counting Northern Ireland when I say that, okay? Because remember, if you go back past the beginning of the 20th century, Ireland was all one, and most of our ancestors are in that group where there's no distinction between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So there's 32 counties. There's 163 poor law unions. There's 331 baronies. Here we go. Remember, I'm telling you, you need to find either the civil parish or the townland. There's 2,508 civil parishes in Ireland. Now, of course, they're broken up by counties, so you have so many in each county. Okay, and then there's the townland, 60,462. Okay, so, and again, place matters when you're looking for records. So, and just to give you a visual on this, remember I said, if you can identify the county, civil parish, or townland, you can identify the other land divisions. That's why I'm focusing on those. Here we go. 32 counties, remember? And I'm dividing these up by the province. So on the west, we have Connacht, the province of Connacht, and the 5 counties in there: Galway, Leitrim, Mayo, Roscommon, and Sligo. And then Munster, okay? Munster now over here on the southwest. Clare, Cork, Kerry, Limerick, Tipperary, and Waterford. Once you get to Leinster, you have a lot more counties, and I won't read all of these, but I also will say that they're often smaller counties than some of the ones on the west. And then Ulster, which is in here, by the way, on the province of Ulster, are the 6 counties that are currently part of Northern Ireland, and then I think it's 3 others. I got this. Yeah, 9. The 3 others in this list that are currently in Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, which is Monaghan, Donegal, and Cavan, County Cavan. And again, you can find maps like this online. Here you have all the counties, this just the counties now of Ireland, and over here in the north, you have the 6 counties that are in current day Northern Ireland. And remember, here's Cavan, that's part of Ulster, the originally part of Ulster province, Monaghan and Donegal. You can see they're mashed right up against, you could say, the Northern Ireland, the borders. Now, this might help just to know this. Civil parish names and boundaries were originally created they were identical to the original ecclesiastical parishes of the Church of Ireland. Now, the Church of Ireland is not a Catholic church, and as we all know, Ireland historically has been a very Catholic country. The Church of Ireland was basically the Church of England with the Irish name, and part of the Anglican faith, again, all started by Henry VIII, when he split with the church over his wife problem, we'll call it. Okay, so originally, you're going to see that the church boundaries, if you're researching for the Church of Ireland, are identical to the civil parish in name and boundaries, which is pretty cool for folks researching their Protestant, I'll say, or specifically Church of Ireland ancestors. After 1869, however, the church parishes, the boundaries changed, the civil parishes didn't. So just to give you an idea, again, with the map, these are the civil parishes of County Leitrim. Okay, now County Leitrim is not a very big county, compared to some of the others. And there's probably about 18 or 20 civil parishes in County Leitrim. Get ready. Here's County Kerry. Well, County Kerry has about 85 civil parishes. Okay, again, why do we care? Land records, some of the records we're talking about are divvied up by civil parish. So if you have no idea where in County Kerry they came from, you'll be looking through a lot of record groups. And hey, I've done it. So I know it can be done without knowing those parish names, but it certainly would have made life easier if I'd done my homework with US records and was able to find that. So I'm not doing what this is. And I'm not done here. Here's the civil parishes in County Galway. And I believe there's 120 on this map. Okay. Townlands. This is so interesting to me because civil parishes, remember, came in with the Church of Ireland and the whole idea of organizing, around their church and their boundaries, when the British, introduced that faith into Ireland and so on. Okay, but townlands are much more ancient than that. Like the baronies, they're very old, and they're some of the most ancient geographic divisions. And they range in size from a few acres to thousands of acres. So it's kind of hard to put in, my experience with this in terms of my family, we're talking maybe 8 farms, and a lot of places. So towns are not townlands. Towns are in townlands. Okay. So, but it is important, and a lot of times this has been very helpful, is to identify the nearest town to where your ancestor came from. And I know in the case of some of the research I've done, including on tombstones, and rather than list the townland, somebody listed the nearest town. Well, when you look for the records in that town, which has got a different geographic boundary, you can't find them. But what you have to think about is they were probably in one of the townlands right around that town. So you're still narrowed down very well if you know the nearest town. And here's the other little problem with townlands. There are more than one, even in County Galway, there's more than one location, often with the same townland. And maybe often is not the right word, but often enough. And so that's why you want to know the civil parish. But hey, if you know the townland, you can narrow down to the 2 or 3 civil parishes in County Galway that have that name, that have that townland name. Now, just to give you an idea, this here, and you can see in the colored area in the middle of this is the civil parish of Shrule. Okay, so this is the civil. Now, if I only knew that the civil parish, and I knew it was County Mayo civil parish, I'm golden, really. But even better is if I knew which townland my ancestor was in. And eventually I will be trying to find that. Whether I can't find it in US records, I'll try to find it in Irish records. And there's about 30 townlands here in this civil parish. I think I have another one just to show you. This is the civil parish of Cullersa in County Galway. And again, in this colored area here are all the townlands in this particular parish. And what's neat about this little map, by the way, too, is you can see the neighboring parishes. And again, a point that I've come across many times. If you notice, Cullersa Parish in County Galway is smack up against Shrule Parish. And Shrule Parish is in County Mayo. So if you were living here in Galway, in Cullersa Parish, it's possible you're going to a church. Remember, when you're looking for church records, right across the border here, the nearest church might be in a different county, for example. Having this map is very, very, very helpful. Now, ecclesiastical divisions. I'm just going to actually mention 3 of the main religions of Ireland, but be aware that there are other religions. There are Quakers, there's Jewish religion, and so on in Ireland, and of course there are records for all of that. So I'm just going to mainly talk about the top 3 in terms of population. Here's the Catholic Church archdiocese. There are 4 archdioceses, or you could say provinces, in the Catholic Church in Ireland. And again, now we're talking all of Ireland, which includes Northern Ireland. All right. And so we have Armagh, Cashel, Dublin, and Tuam. Now, these ecclesiastical provinces or archdioceses, so to speak, are divided into dioceses. And there are 26 dioceses in all of Ireland. And then they are subdivided into deaneries, which you won't have to worry much about this word in terms of researching, so you can kind of forget that. But I just want you to understand there's subdivisions and so on until you get down to the church parishes. Now, in Ireland, a parish does not necessarily mean one church. Your parish might have 3 different churches in that parish. Okay, so we have to kind of separate the church name from the parish name. So for example, from my mother's side of the family, the church would be St. Mary's, the parish would be Headford Claren. And in that parish, St. Mary's is in one of the churches in that parish. So here's the diocese of the Catholic Church in Ireland. Remember, when we start talking and getting into the religious records, you know, they don't distinguish in terms of, there's no separation per se, except for maybe where the records live between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So if we look at the provinces, and I'm just showing you in black on this map, Tuam, Armagh, you know, Cashel, Dublin, you know, those ecclesiastical provinces. But then those provinces are divided up into the dioceses. So again, you know, this is the good news. If you were researching and all you knew was that your family came from Galway, you know, you could at least narrow down by diocese, you know, to a few dioceses, you know, maybe 2 that are associated with Galway. Okay, and that's helpful to you, for you to understand when you, again, at least you know the county. Now, I'm breaking this down further. I've got 1 diocese from that map that I just showed you, Tuam. And that is divided into church parishes, and here's all the parishes. Okay, now again, if we're looking for records, you know, wouldn't it have been better if I had a good idea that they lived about here, because I know they're civil town land, and so the church is either here or here. You know, and so I might not find it, I might find it in the neighboring parish to where they're living, because that was easier for them to go to church here than here. So with the maps, and there's tons of maps online, once I've gotten the location of the civil location area, I can usually identify what parish or parishes those records have to be in. And I'm just showing you, this is actually about St. Mary's in Headford. And I'm showing you here, it even has the priest's name. And I just looked this up just for the heck of it. And here it is. Here's the parish, Headford Claren. And here's St. Mary's Church in Headford, County Galway, and so on. And then it gives the name of the priest. And it has an email address, and so on and so on. And their hours for Mass. And that you can, and some of these you can watch online, which is kind of cool if you find where your family was going to church. So you could maybe watch Mass from online, and so on. So and they give you the name of the deanery, but the records will be divided up by diocese and then by parish. Now, the Church of Ireland, which is in terms of population, historically has been the 2nd largest religious group in Ireland. And again, this is the Church of England coming to Ireland, and, you know, probably smartly not calling it the Church of England, calling it the Church of Ireland. All right, so it's one of the Protestant faiths, and its Church of Ireland is divided into 2 provinces, and it pretty much splits Ireland right down the middle, like east and west. Like the Catholic Church, the provinces are divided into dioceses, and then each diocese is divided into a parish. So again, you know, here's, just to give you an idea, here's the province of Armagh, and here's all the dioceses. So this would be up in the Northern Ireland particularly, but remember, not exclusively, because that province, ecclesiastical province, included some of the counties that are in Ireland. And here's their diocese, and then here's the province of Dublin. Okay, and here's their diocese. And again, one of the things just to notice that we have these dioceses with double names, like Derry and Rappo, and Down and Dromore, and Meath and Kildare, Dublin and Glendalough. You know, like, look at this one. There's the name of the diocese: Cashel, Waterford, Lishman, Ferns, Ossory, and Leyland. It's like, okay, all right, so get used to that. So here's the Church of Ireland, and again, you can find a map like this online if you're researching that. And here's your diocese. And at least you can say, well, I'm in Galway. Well, I've narrowed down to at least the diocese, if not, maybe not the parish, but I've at least got the diocese. Now, again, there are other faiths and churches, the Presbyterian, the Methodist, the Quakers, and the Jewish. I just want to mention, and we'll talk a little bit about Presbyterians as we get into Irish records. Now, I thought this would be just of interest to you, because this is, again, how you would want to build your understanding of place in Ireland. So I know that on my mother's side of the family, I knew they came from County Galway, and I knew they came from Clochanover. Now, that was the townland. That was, maybe 8 farms, like I said. I also discovered that there was more than one spelling historically for Clochanover, so I recorded both of them. From just those 2 pieces of information, it was very easy for me to find out what the civil parish that was in, Colini. Once I had those 3 pieces of information, and of course, Connacht was easy, Galway's in Connacht, I was able to identify the poor law union and the barony. So knowing 2 things gave me all the rest. Now, once I knew that, I was able to look from in my case, I have this history. I knew that St. Mary's was the church in Headford that they went to, but I could have found that out by looking at a map for where the nearest church was to Clochanover. So it's St. Mary's. Once I've identified the church, I can identify the parish. Now remember, the parish is not St. Mary's like we think in the United States, it's Headford Claren. If I know the parish, I can easily find out the diocese. And the deanery, I haven't found that to be that significant in my research so far, but I did put it down. And remember, I got that right off by just Googling Headford, St. Mary's in Headford, and it gave me the deanery. And of course, if I know that the diocese is Tuam, I can find out what archdiocese or province it's in, which is also Tuam. And don't be surprised if you don't see some similar names here. So from knowing just knowing this and this, these 2 things, I was able to put all of the rest of this together. Or I could have. Again, I did know the St. Mary's, but I could have done it from a map. And here's another example. Again, I actually, on the other side of my family, I was actually told Wexford. It turns out that my family came from the border of Carlow and Wexford, and the nearest town where they went to market was in Wexford. So they associated themselves with Wexford. But in doing some digging, but I also had this name, I was very lucky. I had this name, and I was able to figure out pretty quickly that Carrickduff, again with 2 spellings, was not in Wexford, but was rather right on the border and very close to a town in Wexford, but it was actually in County Carlow. And once I had these 2 pieces of information, I was able to fill in the civil parish, the barony, Leinster, and then I had to do some for the nearest church. Now, and I actually found 2 different churches in my family history as I dug further, but one of them was St. Lazarine in Kildavin. And of course, I got the parish. This is the church, this is the parish, Clonigal. And of course, from that, the diocese and so on. But it turns out that there's quite a few records in another church that's actually a little further away, but I believe possibly because it's older and may have been there before St. Lazarine. So they traveled further out to an older church. Okay, fortunately, it's in the same diocese and the same parish. And that's all you really need is parish to get the records a record that is available, if it's available online. Now, just by the way, I'm going to tell you about Irish records in a minute here. I was able to get all of the Clonigal church parish records online that I needed for my family as far back as they were in Ireland, that are available, that exist. I'm not able online to get the ones from St. Mary's because they have not appeared yet for the public records. Now, is it likely that they're on some website where they're paid? Probably. And I'll probably go back and do that. But I actually traveled to Ireland and got the records, so I wasn't vested in doing that. But I'm just saying, don't think that all the parish records are up for free on the site I'm going to show you, but don't get discouraged if you don't find them there. Check to make sure that they even have the records. One thing I like about the National Library of Ireland is if you put in a parish, they basically tell you there's no records. So you know at least that it's not like your ancestors missing from the records. It's that those records aren't on that site. That doesn't mean you won't find them on a paid site. Okay. So now we're into researching your Irish documents for your Irish ancestors. Now, which one of these groups are going to be meaningful to you does depend in part on what time your ancestor, when they came here, what date. So we're going to talk about 4 groups here, mainly. We're going to look at the Irish census. We're going to look at the civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths, and what's available there. We're going to look at Griffith's valuation and some of the Irish church records. Again, not all faiths, but just some of the main ones. Okay. And this is not all the records or all the records that are online of groups. I'm just hitting in terms of time, the main ones and where I would start. Now, 1901 and 1911 Irish census they're both available online for free from the National Archives of Ireland. And for those of you who are, taking some notes, you can just write down National Archives of Ireland and look up the website name, or I put it down here right below, National Archives mashed up together, all lowercase.ie. Now, obviously, if your ancestors came in 1860 or 1840, you're not looking in the 1900 or 19. Remember, I said time and place, time and place. But if they had an odd name, especially, and I knew the county, I might actually look in these because by looking in these, I might find an existing family that's directly related, that's in the same place. So it might give me a clue as to place. In Ireland, if all I knew was county, this might clue me into the civil parish or likely civil parish. So I'm not saying these can be valuable even in those situations. Now, just saying, if you're looking at the 1901 or 1911 Census of Ireland, you're looking at a document much like our US Census records that are typed form and, of course, handwritten in the middle of it. And again, these are all for free, National Archives of Ireland. What do they have? A lot of the same information we have. Name and surname, and I mean given name and surname, the relation to head of household, the religion. Now that's different than us, right? Education, but when they say education, they're talking about whether they can read and write, just read but not write, that kind of thing. Age, gender, occupation. They have Irish language. They want to know if they speak Irish, if they speak Irish and English. Oh, and I think the instructions were leave blank if they just speak English. It's kind of interesting. So they're mainly doing a survey on who speaks Irish. Now, if you know what was going on in Ireland right before, hostilities, this is maybe a little dangerous information for some. Where born, and usually that's just the county where they were born. Disability, any disability, marital status, and number of years married. For the 1911 census for women, doesn't this ring a bell? You have to wonder whether they were looking at what America was doing. 1910, number of children born, number still living. Now, are there other census available? A lot of the census were destroyed in a bombing in 1922. And then also, unfortunately, for some of the census years, like 1861, 1871, I believe, the Irish destroyed the census themselves after they got their statistical data from it. So, but there are some existing pieces in different counties, so I wouldn't just say you can't find anything. So just example, Antrim, there's some 1851. Belfast City, one ward only, 1851 still exists. For County Cavan, the pieces of the 1821 and 1841 census, and so on. Okay. And you'll have to hunt around. I'd have to do a little more research to tell you where you might find some of these online. Honestly, at this point, I can't think off the top of my head, but as far as I remember, these are not available, for the National Archives in Ireland for free. I could be wrong about that. Remember, online is a changing world. So, but I'm just saying, take a look at this list, or, see if you see any of your counties up here, Galway, 1813. Wow. And so on. And then there's some, but look, numerical returns for Longford Barony only, that kind of thing. But in the 1821 census. So you would take a look at some of these. Now, the civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths. And remember, we were often very disappointed at how far these go back. But remember, in our own Louisiana, how far back do the death records go? Remember, or how far back do the birth records go? If you're out of Orleans Parish, so the civil registration of births, marriages, and deaths, online for free at Irish Genealogy website, which is irishgenealogy.ie. So when did they begin? The good news is it's not like the United States where this state is this and this state is this and everything. Across Ireland, remember, including Northern Ireland, because remember that this is when it was all one Ireland. The civil registration of births and deaths began in 1864. The civil registration of marriages, 1845 for non-Catholics and 1864 for Catholics. So for Catholics, it matches birth, marriages, and deaths. But for non-Catholics, you're lucky you can go back just a little further into 1845 with civil records. Now, what I would highly recommend before you access Irish genealogy, and genealogy is spelled incorrectly up here. Sorry, it's EA, not AE. Okay. irishgenealogy.ie. Identify the civil registration district or districts for that county. You want to at least know the county. Okay. If you know the county, you can narrow down the civil registration districts. So if I put in a name like John Scully, and I'd probably get 100 deaths. So how do I narrow that down? Well, I would want to narrow it down at least by county, right? Okay. Well, the way the civil registration district is divided by civil registration. So I would want to know which civil registrations were in the county where John Scully was living. Now, of course, I also want his age, because if I'm looking for his death record or his birth record, I want to know, what the year is. So I'm telling you to go to Irish Genealogy Toolkit. And here's the site, Irish-genealogy, this is spelled correctly here, -toolkit.com. And you will find a little document, you can download a PDF, an alphabetical list of the civil registration districts by county. And you might find 6 in County Galway and so on. And what you can do when you get to the Irish genealogy site is you can put in your name, the name of the individual, and you can pop in one of the civil registration districts, and it will narrow down to just that district with those names. And you can go through and go, not here. And then you can pop in another civil district. Now, if you know the exact location in County Galway or County Cork or whatever, because you know the town land, and then you can hone right into the correct civil district. Okay, again, place matters when you're looking in Irish records. And just showing you, always look at the image. Always look at the image, not just the extract. When you type in a name and a civil district, and you put in, John Scully death or something like that, you will get a number of hits, little index kind of things, and you can select them and look at the index. And when you look at the index over here on the far left, it's going to give you the townland. And over here, it's going to tell you who was present at their death, and it might even give you their relation. And of course, will give you their age and what they died of. So these are beautiful if you can find these. But remember, if your ancestor left before 1840, unless you're looking for relatives they left behind, like their parents, you're not going to be, you're not going to be looking at this. So again, time and place, time and place. But very, very valuable if you have an ancestor who is still in Ireland, post 1864, or a sibling or a parent, or somebody this is great. And I just did a little blow up here to show you that at the very top they have these different, because these records are divided by these districts. Remember the civil districts. And I'm telling you that you have to narrow down, or you'll be looking at long lists of people that have no, from Cork and you're from Antrim, like it's, so you getting that list of civil registrations by county is invaluable to narrow down, because you're going to see at the top all these districts, and that's how these things are divided up. And here you see the union of, this is the Poor Law Union. But all you really need is that civil district. And here's the county of Clare right here. And it tells you this is a marriage, and it gives you the name of the husband and wife, and it tells you he's a farmer, and it tells you, and over here on the far left where you can't see would be one of the townlands, usually. Where one of them, whichever one came from, whatever they're associated with the church and so on. Oh, and I'm sorry, this is the birth record. I'm sorry. These are the parents. I'm sorry. And then over here would be the child's name. I'm just looking at that, re-looking at that. And here's again a sample Irish death record. And again, you're seeing now this is the civil district of Enniscorthy. And you can see that this district, and because this is related to my family, as I mentioned earlier, this district covers parts of Wexford and parts of Carlow. Okay, and here's John Scully right here. And looky here, over here, the townland. You can see it's very small, character. And it says when he died, and it says that present at his death was Catherine Scully. And Catherine Scully, I'm sure, because I know, was his wife, who was still living at the time. So this is a great to find these online. Okay. Griffith's valuation. Anybody who's been playing around with Irish research has found this. Griffith's valuation, you can search for online for free at Ask About Ireland. And again, you can Google Ask About Ireland, or you can just type in Ask About Ireland, all run together, .ie. You see in .ie this is an Irish website. Now, Griffith's valuation is basically has to do with land records, and it's they were compiled for taxation purposes. Now, by the way, there were valuations post this that you can look up, but this is the key one that's available online, again, for free. It provides information on all property holdings in Ireland between 1847 and 1864, and which county or which area you were in determine whether the Griffiths valuation was taken in 1847 or 1850 or 1857 or 1860. So again, if your ancestors came out in 1850 and they happen to have had the valuation, they were in the part of Ireland where the valuation was done in 1847, you're going to find them. But you might not find them, so you can look up, you can Google, exactly when the valuation was taken for a certain area. Now, there's 1.4 million land holdings on this in this record group with 400,000 households. And look, this is why I said this is important. Why do you want to know the civil parish? Because they're divided by barony and civil parish. Of course, if you know the county, you can often narrow down to the barony. Okay. But again, if you knew the civil parish, you can go right to it. And on Ask About Ireland, you can search by place name, which is what I would be doing if I knew the civil parish, and then, or name, and you can kind of put both in. It's name and civil parish. It's kind of, and get right into, instead of going pages and pages. And then once you're in the civil parish, it's divided by townland. So if you knew the civil parish, but you didn't know the townland, by looking in Griffiths, if they're in there, you'll find out what their townland is. And again, the same thing, like I said, with the death records, you'll know their townland. Usually they're in there. And what you're going to see on these forms is it names the occupier and the immediate lesser. Remember, at this time period, Irish Catholics, a lot of them did not own land, they leased it. And there's a number of different kinds of leases you can have, again, which is beyond this talk. But so this is what it will look like on Ask About Ireland. My big disappointment is that these are no longer printable from Ask About Ireland. They used to be, but you can, of course, image copy them and so on and kind of blow them up. And they're a little blurry in this format. And then there are places on some subscription sites where I believe you can get some of these, with better copies if you're so inclined, just saying. Okay, so here's the occupiers. This actually says, up here is the parish of, and it gives you Colini. And this is in Galway, but this is the parish of Colini. And then over here, all the occupiers, but they're divided by, and the townland. So here's a townland and the occupiers, and a townland and the occupiers, all in the parish of Colini. And then over in this column is the name, in this column is the name of the lesser who is leasing the land, who owns the land. Now that, if you ever get into getting into estate records and things like that with your ancestors, and you have the name of the landlord, this is where you're going. Okay. Church records really quickly, because we don't have a lot of time left. Catholic Church, Church of Ireland, Presbyterian, those are the only ones we're going to cover really quickly. Whoops. Sorry. Look, again, there's an end to all of our research. Only a few Catholic parish registers go back before 1820. So if you can even get back that far, it's amazing. They don't all go back that far. Wexford town goes back to 1671. That's the town, not the county. St. Catherine's in Dublin goes back to 1740. St. Mary's in Limerick City, 1745. And there's a few more like that you can find out. Some church record repositories were destroyed. And remember, sometimes you're going to be reading some records in Latin. They even Latinize the names. Okay, so instead of Mary, it's Maria. Like it's, you're gonna get used to some Latin names. So you might have to pull up, like, what's the Latin for James? What's the Latin for Philip? So that you can recognize your ancestor. This is what you'd be looking at. Lots of handwriting. They're mostly registers. This is a baptism record. It will give the parents' names, of course, the date of baptism, and often the date of birth, but not always. In order to find these records, again, we were looking for which church parish they're in. And how do we figure out which church parish they're in? We find the townland, or the nearest town, at least, where they lived. Again, you have to know place. Now, remember, why do you need that? Because you don't want to have to go through every parish records that are online. And remember, there are 1,153 Catholic Church parishes in Ireland. So again, homework first, then the Irish records. How do you access them online? This is so incredible. The earliest records of many of the parishes, but not all. Remember St. Mary's and everything over in Galway? Not online. They're online for free at the National Library of Ireland. And I should say they're not on this website. National Library, .ie. I love it how the names are the websites are so cool. National Library Ireland, nationallibrary.ie. You can go in person. Again, beyond on the more recent dates, the local churches still have the original records, and in some parts of Ireland, remember, those records were not given up, so even the older records are at the church level. There are microfilm copies of the early records that are not online, or not online yet, at the National Library of Ireland. Also, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City has a lot of microfilm copies of parish records, again, some of which are not online. Okay, so this is another place that you might check if you discover that your parish is not online on the National Library site. For Northern Ireland, microfilm copies of the Catholic Church records. You'll find an index, a barely great index of what's online as a PDF. Okay, and you find that at PRONI, the Public Research Office of Northern Ireland, PRONI. For the Church of Ireland, remember the Protestant Church of Ireland parish church registers, they're almost always, the parishes are almost always carbon copies of the civil parishes, because remember, before 1869, they were identical. You find the civil parish, you know the Church of Ireland parish. And there was an obligation to record baptisms and burials, something the Catholics didn't do, the burials. Most parishes didn't keep that until relatively recent, but the Church of Ireland was both. And they began in the 17th century. And of course, mainly in cities, but it spread to rural areas. So the registers for most places don't start until late 18th century, but just some are way far back. Now, remember, there was a disruption in 1922, and unfortunately, a lot of records were destroyed in the public record office in Dublin. And that's Ireland and Northern Ireland records, you could say, combined. This is a sample of the Church of Ireland baptism and marriage records. In fact, here's the two baptisms on top, and here's the marriage record right here. So short and sweet, but it gives the name of the child and the names of the parents with the mother's maiden name. Sometimes it is here, but not here. Just saying. Again, if you can find the marriage record, of course, you're going to get the maiden name of the woman. How do you find these? This is what you're going to do. Just like we said with the Irish toolkit that we talked about before, every once in a while, you just want to download a document. You're going to download and search, okay, the list of parish registers of Northern Ireland. And I'm saying it like that because I can't remember exactly where it is, but just write this down, the list of parish registers of Northern Ireland. Google that, it will come right up. Download it. It gives every single parish what's still existing, what's not existing, what's gone. It will tell you that's destroyed, so stop looking. And it even on the right-hand column gives you some online places, some of them a subscription, that will have those records that are available. Pretty cool. So again, this is for the Church of Ireland, not Catholic records, the list of parish registers of Northern Ireland. And again, if you want to go in person, mainly most of these records more frequently are kept at the church body library. That's the name of the library, the church body library, in manuscript form. But they have microfilm copies of most records at the National Archives in Dublin, and again at the Public Research Office of Northern Ireland, because now we're talking about a kind of a split in terms of where the records live. Before, I believe, like 1871, most of them are in Dublin. You know, after that date, it depends on whether or not the churches are in Northern Ireland or in Ireland. Okay, and again, some registers are in the possession of local ministers. Presbyterian church records, and this is my last group. I'm going to just tell you, again, you have to know the name of the congregation and or the townland where the ancestor resided to find what parish they're in. So how to find which Presbyterian church records are available once you have that information? There's a website called Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland. And Again, I love the names here, PresbyterianHistoryIreland.com, or you can just Google Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland, and this will come right up. Okay. Again, in person, okay. Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, that's PRONI, that's the acronym here, Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, PRONI. That's where you'll have copies for Northern Ireland. But look, also, remember those other parishes that were kind of back and forth a little, part of the ecclesiastical parish, the same ecclesiastical parish. So these parishes are in Ireland, not Northern Ireland, but Donegal, Cavan, and Monaghan. Presbyterian Historical, now this is Presbyterian records. Presbyterian Historical Society of Ireland, there's microfilm copies and so on, and you can always, and I believe that for some of these records, they will ask you to contact the local minister, and the local minister will have to request the record for you. It gives you permission. Now, I don't know whether there's a date issue there, you know, like before a certain date, we give them to everybody, but if they're more recent, we don't. I haven't actually researched that point, but I did notice that there was some description online for some records for requesting them from your minister first, and then we'll give them to you. Request that, get the local minister to agree. So that's something you might want to know, again, particularly if you were visiting Ireland, to maybe make a little visit to the local minister. Okay, and I'm going to just quickly summarize the research steps that we started out with the beginning. Remember, talk to everybody in the family, see what stories came down, see what somebody say, no, I think my dad told me that our ancestors came from, could be important information. Okay. And remember, not just your immigrant ancestor, but the family members of their siblings, maybe, and so on, going back, because some story might have come down from one that you're not aware of. Then remember, you obtain all the US records you can on the immigrant and their immediate immigrant family, their siblings, their parents, every record you can. And I listed most of them earlier. If at all possible, again, if at all possible, you need to find a US record that tells you at least the county, and hopefully either the civil parish or the townland. I wouldn't stop looking for records until I got one of these, if I could. And again, maybe not your direct ancestor, but maybe their brother or sister and their obituary mentioned it, or their tombstone, or their probate record. And then you sit down and write a full description of your Irish immigrant so that you can identify them in the Irish records. And that description will include, hopefully, the names of their parents, the names of their siblings, their age or approximate age when they came here, their approximate date of birth from that age, where they came from, all of that. And do the same for other immigrant relatives. Once you have that information, now you have when they came, and you have approximate date of birth, and you have a hopefully as close as possible place name. Now you're going to ask yourself, which records are available in Ireland? Well, they came way before they came in the 1840s. There's no point looking in the 1901 census for them, again, unless I'm looking for living descendants or living relatives. So I have to start, I'm time and place dependent. So I need the dates the immigrant was living in Ireland and the immigrant's place of origin to target the right group of records. And then search and find the Irish records that are available online. Start online, but don't be afraid to write letters, send emails, and so on as appropriate. Go on websites and do a little research. And this says the same thing. Sorry. And then, if you can, visit Ireland. It's wonderful. You'll have a great time. And that's all. I'm told Amanda I was going to just say this, and I will, just in case this helps somebody, because we get through questions and I know we're running late. I am the current president of the St. Tammany Genealogical Society, and hopefully you know that a genealogical society is not it's not specific to St. Tammany. All the genealogical societies help everybody, no matter where their ancestors came from. Our society We have, as part of our member benefit, if you join, we will spend up to an hour, hour and a half with you by appointment each year to help you with a specific thing. So if that helps you out, join the club. And, you know, you can always ask for me if it's Irish, and I'll be happy to sit down with you and help you as best I can. Okay, but by appointment, right? So Amanda, thank you. I'm
No,
sorry, oh, we went over.
no,
Sorry.
not at all. Thank you so much, Marguerite. That was so detailed. That was really educational. I've put the St. Tammany Genealogy Society Genealogical Society website here in the chat. So if y'all want to follow up with that, I want to thank you again. And I am going to start with the couple of questions that we received during that we just might want to revisit at the end of the here at the end of the thing. A while back, Susan Wessing asked, what is a barony and a poor law union? Like, what is that measurement, I
Well,
suppose?
just really briefly, a barony is a much older division of Ireland, kind of similar to the provinces that we talked about at the very beginning. It's interesting because it's actually mentioned in Griffiths. They're actually divided by barony, but that's not really the helpful part. The civil parish is what's necessary. And poor law unions, where in the 1830s, um, Ireland was divided into poor law unions, mainly to they created workhouses for the very poor to give them a place to live, meals, you know, and of course to earn money and so on. And also it was a division for tax collection for the poor and so on. So those were created, you know, mainly, you know, again, as part of a facility or, you know, programs to help the poor, again, mainly through workhouses or centers for things like that. So, and then and then from that poor law union, they were divided into those civil registration things that I showed you that were on the top of the registration forms, like where, you know, where I said Enniscorthy was the poor, was basically, you know, in a particular union. It was one of the civil districts. So it's just another way of dividing up for record purposes, that records might be kept under a union. If you knew your ancestor was working in a workhouse, you would want to know the poor law union and look and research those records and the workhouses that are available in those records.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I hope it does. One of my favorite books on Irish history is particularly about the Great Hunger. It's by Lady Cecil Woodham Smith in 1962, and it's still considered one of the definitive histories of that. But she does speak about poor laws and how they existed, record keeping was kept and modified, as well as many other aspects of how the Great Hunger actually influenced a lot of Irish migration to America and Australia.
Okay.
So our next question is, where can you find parents' names if you don't have them? I know we listed a lot of places, but maybe the big three.
Your best bet is your a marriage record. And so if there's an American marriage church record, that is your absolute best bet. And remember, if your ancestors wasn't on there, look for their siblings' marriage records. The other place, depending on how long they lived, or you know, some death records in different states recorded parents' names on the death records. So those would be your two best shots, honestly, for that.
Our next question is from Patricia Schreiber. If the ancestor was Catholic in the USA, would a correct assumption be they were Catholic in Ireland?
Yes, but not exclusively, because some people came over, and being Irish, you know, met a lot of other Irish people, mostly Catholics, and in order to marry in the Catholic faith at different time periods, you converted. So not exclusively, but you almost always you could say yes.
Fantastic. And a follow-up question, are there any workhouse records online or in Ireland?
I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head, but I'd be happy to look something like that up for somebody if they wanted to me to do that. But or you could, you know, they can look it up honestly themselves. Some of this and it's moving all the time. Ireland has been great about trying to put a lot of records up. They want to encourage Irish tourism through genealogy research. So every day when I say it's not online, the next day it's up online, so and it's not always online in the same place. It moved. And in fact, I can tell you, I changed almost, I'd say at least four of some of the places I told you here, as far as where to find something, just in the last couple of years, because it was online, but they moved it over here, and now you have to get it from here. So, but Google is your friend here. So
Here, our next question is, when ancestors came in 1850s, how can you find out if they paid their passage or were sponsored by a government agency in Ireland? I won't lie, I would also refer to see some Woden Smiths thing. It's a real crapshoot.
I
Oftentimes they were just put on
really
ships
don't
because of the
know.
last.
Yeah, that's you know, that would probably, if that happened at all, you might find something like that in a like a court record where somebody paid off their debt or something to that effect. You might have to go into something of that sort. I really don't know. That's something I've never researched, so I'm sorry, I can't tell you.
Yeah, actually, I have a little bit just because in a couple of my trips to Ireland and, in the past learning Irish history, but there were entire situations where people during the famine were just put on ships for free as
Yeah.
ballast, which was necessary when going back and forth between countries and sent to Canada and the US without any documentation.
Oh, absolutely. Right. But I mean, it's hard to say whether there was any payment that went along with that, or whether they were paid by somebody else, or whether there was no charge at all. Just get them out of here,
Mhm.
So that, knowing the answer to that question, I don't know if you'll find that.
Our next question is, any hints if ancestors possibly came through Canada?
Yes. There were one of the things I learned is that especially for people who paid, but not necessarily exclusively, it was a cheaper trip to go to Canada. So even if somebody was paying for the whole ship load, it was cheaper to come into Canadian ports at some time periods than it was to come into Americans. Many of them then made their way down into America from there. But again, we have Irish immigrants in Canada too. So, absolutely, yes. And so if you can't find them in an Irish port, I would be looking in the Canadian records. And the Canadians are really good too about putting a lot of public records up online for free.
Were there children in workhouses? I can answer this. Yes, yes, there were. There were a lot of children in
A
workhouses.
lot of children.
The next question is, can you think of a reason why a woman would give incorrect information concerning her parents on a marriage license?
I would, if that happened, honestly, I would be more likely to think that the groom or guy, didn't find out what her parents' names were and just made something up on the spot. I would be more inclined to think something like that than that a woman would have a reason to lie about her parents. But I mean, I'm sure there's a possibility, but that's what I would say would be more likely.
That's good.
I mean, I see that
Again,
on death records a lot, and I know that it's like the grandchild or something is answering the question and probably doesn't have a clue. And just, when I start looking at the informant, I'm like, yeah, he didn't know, you
right.
know.
I've definitely encountered those death records in the archives regularly, for sure. That is a universal problem. What about going back and forth between Scotland and Ireland?
Well, in fact, one of my friends who I think is here today, has just did a brilliant report on her ancestors who did leave Ireland and go to Scotland and stay there for through a generation or two before coming out to the States. So before descendants came to the States. So you will find that also. And again, I can't speak to exactly how to research that per se, but yes, if you can't, if you find that they came from Scotland and your American records, that doesn't necessarily mean they didn't originally come from Ireland. So you would then follow through the Scottish records until you found the Irish records, so to speak, or the reference to Ireland.
Mhm. Do you know of newspapers in Ireland that go pretty far back?
Well, there's a website that's a paid prescription, although like a lot of these subscriptions, 14 days free and so on, called Find My Past, that has newspapers up online for free, for your 14 days. And then after that, there's a subscription fee. That website does have some pretty cool stuff, because one of the things that's on there, they have the records of these civil courts called petty courts or petty session courts. And one of the things I found out is that one of my second great grandmothers was hauled into court for telling one of the neighbors who repeatedly trespassed on her land, and I'm assuming with allowing animals to graze or something, that she was going to knock his block off. So when we say petty, apparently they were petty. I love that particular story. but I found that.
What about individuals in the US who sponsored someone in Ireland? Where is that info?
Sponsorship was more of a recent development in terms of Ireland and America, and we're probably talking like the 40s, 50s, 60s, in that range. And I would probably be looking at the again, that's something I haven't researched, but I would probably be looking, more into like the naturalization process, passports, things like that, to see if there's any information in those circles for bringing somebody out. Immigration, information from on maybe a federal level, on immigration at that time period. Any records that we have there, maybe at NARA.
Yeah, in fact, I guess that would be a possibility that the witnesses might have been the sponsors or related.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Just not a given by any
Yeah,
means.
right.
Immigration from one state to another, ancestor went to Indian territory. I would say send that to our Ask an Archivist, since it's tangential. Census, the American census is always your friend. The ones on Ancestry, it's available on Ancestry, Family Search, Heritage Quest, etc. Would there be obits in newspapers in Ireland? How far back do Irish newspapers go?
Yeah, again, the one place I know that I found Irish newspapers is on Find My Past. I'm sure there are other subscription series that have them already, maybe even some of the more public ones that we're aware of, that branched out overseas. So again, I would do a Google search, where can I find Irish records, digital copies of Irish newspapers, but definitely on Find My Past. And remember, if you have 14-day free subscription, you could give it a shot and see what you could find in that time period. I wouldn't be doing that without place, because you might waste your time. You waste your 14 days if you were doing that. But they do have some great stuff on that site.
Oh, great. And also Clarice has shared in chat britishnewspaperarchive.co.uk, which is fun and I want to visit and learn about. I missed how to get in touch personally with Marguerite. We haven't shared that. You can either email me. Charles asks, can you comment specifically on so-called Scotch-Irish research records? My Louisiana ancestor came around 1800. Are there specific research tips for that?
One thing I would tell you is there's a couple of recent books that came out, and I wish I had written down their names, that are specifically targeting the Scotch-Irish research. So I would look for a really good book that's specific to genealogy research, for that group. I also do want to mention, by the way, I'll hold it up, but if you're going to invest in a genealogy book on Irish research, I think that John Grenham's, and his name is spelled Grenham, you can see it down here, called Tracing Your Irish Ancestors, and you can see how fat it is. I mean, as I said, this is a big topic, and so there's so much great information in here about, all divided up by county and so on and so on. But again, knowing your place even helps you use this book, and you have to know it to use it. So so many people just do don't have enough, haven't gotten all the records they could on their ancestor. And usually there's something out there that gives you the place. I'm not saying we're all that lucky, but please don't give up on that, and do go sideways and get their siblings' records if your own ancestor doesn't produce that place. You'd be surprised how many times I found the answer in somebody else's a marriage record or obituary or something where it was exactly the place by going sideways instead of just back.
Okay, let's see here. I'm gonna ask the remaining three questions. Let's see here. So from Charles, we have some of my family records state a name Ford, but also O'Ford, both from Dublin around 1800. Do you feel one or the other could be more correct?
All right, I'm going to give you my 2-minute story on this. I've been to Ireland. My mom is from Ireland. My dad's parents are from Ireland. I was driving around Ireland with my Uncle Bill because I wanted to find this particular townland and visit it where my more distant ancestors came from. And the townland was Ceylon. And as we're driving along, there was a sign Sylaune. A little further, I saw another sign Sylaun. And another little further on, there was a little store with a sign that said Sylaune. And I turned to my uncle and said, Uncle Bill, how do you spell Ceylon? And you'd have to have seen the look on his face because it was incredulous that I would ask that question. Like, hi, any way you like. So if you're looking for a answer to which is correct, you're not going to get it from the Irish because you could call yourself anything you like. And if you like the O, you got the O. And if you didn't like the O, you took it off. And they were members of the same family spelling their name differently. And they don't see a problem with that. So when we have these stories about how the clerk changed my name and all this, and I'm thinking, her ancestor probably didn't care what we spelt it, or maybe that is how he spelt it. So go with both. If you're doing research, remember I said you got to copy all the spellings and the variations you've seen because the records could be under any one of those. And they could have started out with O and then dropped it. So some of the records are under O and some aren't.
Mm, yes,
So which is
very true.
correct? Any way you like.
It's true. It's true. There are you will find multiple spellings just like that. Let's see here. Is there a reference on writing a timeline, giving info located? Do you mean like kind of a way to keep track of your records? I generally recommend the starting like, charts that you can get for free from ancestry.com and familysearch.org.
Yeah, I think of a timeline as a list of not just records, but events in time versus, a record group, for example. I might keep track of, I've got the birth record, their marriage record, their death, and there's a little bit of a timeline there. But if I'm creating a timeline, I might say, this is when Northern Ireland split from Ireland, and this is when the records got divided, and this is when the church was built in Headford. And this is before that they went to another church, and so I might have like dates about events that would help me orient myself on what was going on in the family and also in the location around them in a given time period. Kind of like if I was putting up New Orleans timeline, I might list some key events that were happening in New Orleans, and then in between putting in, there was a fire in New Orleans and destroyed half the buildings, and my great-grandfather was born the year after, and then the next year, something else happened, and then the next year he was in the census. And so it depends on which kind of timeline you're referring to. But if you can find, you usually Google find like a historic timeline for any location. And you usually will find at least the bare bones of something for Ireland, for example, or a specific location like Galway.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Marguerite. And then Sandra, yes, you can share your email. That's fine. I just want to thank you again for all of this, Marguerite. This was really like informational. It really cleared up a lot of confusion or just, maybe not nailed down ideas I had about how the records are organized, like between the townlands and the various like levels. But I do understand the need for that because there's at any given time in New Orleans censuses, there's around 45 John Kellys, which is my John
Yeah,
Smith for Ireland.
yes,
But
absolutely.
yeah, we're
Yeah,
so happy to have you. This was great.
well, just enjoy the hunt. Just try to enjoy the hunt. I mean, just looking at the records, I think it's some, I love doing that, you know? So try to, and remember there's an end to everything, you know? Yeah,
Oh yes,
so,
Kia Kelly, John Kelly. There
yeah.
we go. Um, and Mary Kelly is another is the,
Oh,
is
John
the
and Mary, I love it.
ancestor.
Yeah. Could you get
Um,
not only the last name, but the first names? That's right.
um, I also want to say, welcome to Disperse. I'll leave the chat open a little bit so folks can get their links real quick. And thank you, Marguerite.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this, and I really hope it helped some of you, you know, but happy hunting.